Welcome back to Crafting a Meaningful Life. And boy, do I have a show for you. I know I think I have a show every single week, but I do. And today I have the most amazing woman. And so let's just start right off. Welcome, Michelle McCullough, to the podcast Crafting a Meaningful Life. This is what I think was amazing about the fact that we are just doing this podcast together. And this morning, as you joined me on the channel, was really the first time we actually talked to each other, yet having lived in the same state for decades. And how is it that you have been like kind of out there in the periphery, and yet I find that we are so much same. So if you watch me because you like me, you can watch because you're going to love this woman. Okay, so let's start with telling the listeners, Michelle, a little bit about yourself and kind of your background and what led you to today being one of the most sought after speakers, being not only someone who's producing your own work, but you were the head of the U.S. Happiness Research Project. What? Okay, so tell people about you. Ah, hmm. Um, yeah. Um, yeah.
And once they could understand their own emotional intelligence, then they would actually be more productive. And so if we were talking about resilience or high performance or even happiness, they actually went back to their desks more productive than if we talked about productivity. And so people didn't believe that I had this hypothesis. And so that's when last year I commissioned a research study. It took us a fair amount of time to get it done and get the report completed, but the United States Happiness Report came about because I wanted to prove this concept. And so we worked with working Americans all across the country. It's separated by generations and genders so that we could really see the different nuances between millennials and Gen X and Gen Z, and also what the differences are for men and women. And so now we have this book of research that supports what I've been saying all along. But what we found is that when we can focus on emotional intelligence in organizations, productivity increases more than if we talk about productivity.
Ah, you're speaking my language, girl. All right, so let's, for the listeners who are a little bit behind that curve on knowing and understanding emotional intelligence, can you share that concept with people?
Yeah, I think that especially, and I wish I understood why, when we are such emotional beings, we don't talk about emotions enough. And
Right.
it's so crazy because we feel it all. Humans, that's one of the great equalizers for all of us, is that we all have emotions and we all feel things. And we feel them at different levels. But really, we can all understand what it's like to feel happy or even to feel sad or to feel grief or to feel heartache. But in the world that we live in, we have so many things that are happening to us, even more so. Like I think about the last 5 years and how the world has changed over the last 5 years. And I feel like, generally speaking, we're all still holding in a collective breath, like waiting for that release and trying to figure out where do we fit? How is it affecting things? So even within the last 5 years, I feel like our emotional regulation is a little bit off, and emotional wellness is really important for each of us. And I've got bosses saying, well, this isn't my fault. Like, it's not my responsibility. I don't want to be a therapist. I don't want to be the one who has to teach these things to my team. But the reality is no one else is. No one else is teaching the kind of emotional intelligence necessary. And it really isn't a lot. It's really helping people understand. One of the things that we studied was that happiness is one thing, but resilience is such a huge piece of the puzzle. A person's ability to be able to bounce back after a challenge, whether that's a small challenge or a big challenge, really is at the core of people understanding their own emotional wellness and their ability to be able to say, this is how I'm feeling right now. This is how I want to feel instead. And I am committed to working in the gap. I'm committed to figuring out the middle. I'm committed to getting myself to that place, because one of the challenges that I saw in organizations was a lot of resignation, and not like leaving organizations, but just being resigned to feeling sad, being resigned to feeling overwhelmed, being almost complacent about the negative emotions and not the commitment to moving towards those emotions that are going to help them not just be more productive at work, but be better team players, better people in their friendships, in their romantic relationships, whether that's a partnership or a marriage. And so it just affects so many other places if you can decide and tell yourself that this is something that you can work on. Too often people put themselves in a bucket of what their emotions are, and they need to understand that they have the ability to shift and switch those emotions anytime.
So one of the things, and I'm sure you've encountered this, Michelle, that it's a sadness spot for me, is the number of women, particularly, because those are the ones that I just talk to most, that have resigned themselves to living flatline. That this is my life, here it is. There's no movement really either way. I don't have the ability, the money, the situation. It's what I call victimville. They love to hang out there, but they just don't see another option other than just living flatline. And the reason I recognize that is because that's where I was for so many years, just resigned to living this flatline life and putting your nose on the grindstone and leaving it there, whether it's bloody or not. That there aren't a lot of options for people. So in building this resiliency that you speak about, which is such a key thing, a lot of people confuse having resilience with resignation and leaving the nose on the grindstone, even when it's bleeding and bloody, rather than standing up and creating resilience. So how do you balance those two things with people?
So one of the keynotes that I give regularly, and it's actually inspired by the research and some things that I learned last year, but one of the topics that we talk about is what I call stretch capacity. And stretch capacity is your ability to be able to stretch when things are tricky. And so there are times when you can't stretch very much. You've got maybe some personal challenges, health challenges, physical challenges, relationship challenges, and you're in a place where you are only able to do a little, like you're just stretching just a little. And there are other times where things are going well, your circumstances, external circumstances, work is good, relationships are good, life is good, and you might be able to stretch a little bit more. But one of the things that's key is that one of the things I think that helps us avoid the resignation is knowing where we can stretch at any given time. There are definitely times when we need rest and relaxation, but even in rest and relaxation, we can say, you know what, this is a stretch for me, but this is a stretch I can do. We know from exercise, we know from life that when we stretch, we grow. And so it's just acknowledging, are you in a place where you can big stretch, or are you in a place where you can little stretch? And acknowledging that and knowing that. And that's one of the key reasons why I talk about this principle to leaders, because it's their responsibility to know the stretch capacity of every member of their team. That doesn't mean that they can't require the job to be done, because it does need to get done. But it's looking at each person and saying, okay, I understand that this person is at a place where they can't do very much, but what can they do? And it's focusing on the can rather than the can't that really helps people move from resignation to resilience, and helping people see emotionally, yes, even though this is hard, I can still do X, Y, or Z. So it's knowing that principle and applying that stretch capacity.
One of the great things about that concept that came to me while you were talking about that was that sometimes people fear that they have to step into something and that this is going to be their life and they don't know if they can handle it. But the concept of stretch, that it's like an elastic band that you can stretch into it and then you can come back to your comfort zone. You don't have to stay at the pull point for the rest of your life. You can stretch into it and then come back and stretch into it. Is that a piece of it, knowing when to pull the band and when to let go? And
Yeah, 100%. And I think that part of us, especially like I look at lots of high performers. I've studied high performers for a long time, go getters, people who are willing to do things. There are people who live in a constant state of that pull all the way back until what? Burnout, until they snap. And then they have missed the opportunities because they stayed out so far, so long that they weren't giving themselves that rest and rejuvenation that was necessary. And so part of this is knowing and understanding who you are. And I think it's two things mostly. Number one, knowing who you are at that deep level and knowing that sometimes you can do more and sometimes you can't. And if you can honor that within yourself, then you'll spend a lot less time feeling guilty for whether you can or whether you can't. You just know, I'm at a place where I can do it. I'm at a place where I can't, and that's okay. But I'm going to do what I can, even when I feel like I can only do a little. I'm still going to do what I can and not give up. But the second part about that is we have a lot of shame around whether or not we are always stretching. I think that if we're not stretching, we feel like there's something wrong with us. If we're not operating at our prime, there's something wrong. If we're not able to keep up with everyone else around us doing everything else, there's something wrong. And the reality is that we're human, and that we have, not only do we have our own imperfections and we have our own weaknesses, but we were not intended to be perfect. And so we have to honor and
thank you.
honor who we are, and honor that perfection's not required, and there is no shame or guilt on those times where you say, hey, I'm in a rest phase. I need to honor that. I need to rejuvenate a little. I'm going to still do the things that I can do, because I think that's the other thing, is that we have this pendulum that swings, and we've got, okay, I'm really going to be stretching. I'm going to do all the things I need to do. And then instead of going back to like a good optimal level, we go all the way over to doing nothing. And instead of doing nothing, we just need to find our good swing right in the middle, not where we're all the way up here and not where we're all the way back here, but right in that middle and that sweet spot of honoring that, yes, sometimes we can do a little more, sometimes we can do a little less, but we're going to live in that optimum swing place where we have the emotional intelligence to understand what we can do without pushing ourselves too far and without complete burn and total burnout.
Yeah. You know, one of the topics that you brought up is one that I'd love us to delve a little deeper into, and that is this concept of perfectionism. You know, I think that it's not just in Utah, that this
True.
is something, I mean, we do think that Utah is more of this than anyone else, but it's not just here. And unless you're in a Mid-Eastern culture, or, I mean, I'm sorry, an Eastern culture, of just growing in this Zen state. If you're in the Western world, you have this concept of do more, get more, and that means I am more. And we kind of have that reversed. But the perfectionism piece, how has that been fueled by social media?
I honestly feel like I love the quote by Pastor Stephen Furtick, who says, one of the reasons we struggle with insecurity is because we compare our behind the scenes to other people's highlight reel. And I think social media has done, back in the olden days when there wasn't social media, and even when media wasn't as big of a presence, it was just the people in your neighborhood that you were worried about connecting with or impressing or understanding. And now we feel this need to impress the whole world. How many likes do I get? How many followers do I have? And even those who aren't connected to social media, I still feel like we have access to so many more people than we ever have before. And so even if you're not trying to show up as an influencer or anything else, you can still see what everyone else is doing, which just increases the comparison. And comparison is, and the research showed, one of the number one one of the number one damages that we do when we look at our own happiness, because we compare our happiness to other people. We compare, well, I'm happier than so and so, but I'm not as happy as this person. And so we look at our own emotions comparatively rather than looking at them internally. We look at them like, oh, well, I saw so and so. They went to Hawaii. Didn't they just go to Hawaii last week? I'm not as happy as them, but my neighbor down the street, her son is in the hospital and I'm happier than her. And so we play this constant mental game because our brains are trying to make sense of all of the information and data that we get from the people around us, instead of just saying, this is what I want to be doing. I am comfortable and confident with what I want to be doing. And if I'm not comfortable and confident with what I want to be doing, what am I doing regardless of what anyone else is doing? So really, part of that emotional intelligence piece and understanding it is not making decisions about our emotions based off of anyone else around us, and really just looking internally for how we want to feel, not only how we want to show up, whether we're hitting goals or running businesses or whatever that looks like.
Yeah. I have so many people say to me, Mary, you're the most photogenic person I've ever seen. You never take a bad photo. And I say back to them, well, duh, I don't post the bad ones. And the reason I don't take a bad photo is because I don't post them. It's not that I don't take a bad photo. I want people to realize the realization of what that really looks like.
Yes.
I might take 10 photos at an event and post one, and I never take one of me speaking because I make so many crazy faces. I've discovered this, that I can't take a photo while I'm talking because I look like this kind of craziness, So, but another thing I caught myself doing on social media, some have a little post, and those are the people who like stories. You know what I mean? Flipping through stories. Other people like to read a little bit about it, but I found myself on the posts in the feed, people's feed, that I would look. I'm admitting to this. I would look and see how many likes they had. And if it was a lot, then I thought that's probably worth my time to read. If it was just a couple, well, I'd go on to find, you know what I mean? And when I realized that I was judging the quality of what someone wrote based on the number of likes, Michelle, I was horrified. And so I really have trained myself to not look at that and to say, oh, this is my friend so-and-so, or this is someone that looks like they have, the topic of this. And you can really skim through the first 2 or 3 sentences and be like, oh, I'd like to read more about this. But I really do not let myself look at, this thing has 2 likes. And if I do, I say, oh, they must have just posted it 30 seconds ago.
Yeah.
So that I don't judge the value of the content based on the like. What are your suggestions for people as they use social media? Because it really can't be get off social media.
Agreed.
But how do people use that? And what suggestions or what parameters can we put on ourselves that we choose, not someone else, that we choose, that help us with dealing with social media?
So, interestingly enough, we actually did a fair amount of research in the study about those who spend time on social media and those who don't. And so we can compare the data, like those who said they were happier. Are they spending time on social media or are they not? And the happiest people are spending the least amount of time on social media. But the happiest people are still spending time on social media. So to your point, there are ways that we can utilize social media without affecting our emotional regulation. And I think the number one thing is to limit your time. And for each person, it's different. So you might be able to handle more on social media than some of your friends. But there are some people who might only be able to handle less. And so again, without comparison and without saying, well, I should be able to handle more, really check in and understand what that looks like for you. The happiest people know when they need to stop on social media because it starts to change their emotional wellness. And so one of the things that I did is I just checked, okay, where do I need to be? And my limit is about 30 minutes, which actually is not very long.
Right.
And so that 30 minutes can go by pretty fast for me, especially as it's coming up and saying, oh, here's your warning. Here's the time that's coming there. But in that 30 minutes, that makes me a lot more intentional about where I'm spending time. I'm going to the people that I care about. And then the other thing that I found for myself is that if I use social media in the dead space, and for me, that's like waiting at the doctor's office, waiting to pick up my kids at school, waiting in other places. Like if I'm using social media to fill my time in that dead space, then I actually find that at the end of the day, I feel like I haven't accomplished anything. So one of the things that I started to do in August of 2024, after I read all this research, after I wrote the report, after I saw social media, I made one change that has changed everything for me. And now I carry a physical book everywhere I go. I used to have Audible. I used to have Kindle on my phone. But then when I pick up my phone, there's notifications that pop up. And so now anytime in the dead space, I call that my learning time, my reading time. And I read a lot of fiction books this year, but it was so much better for me to say, okay, I'm waiting and I'm filling my brain with something.
I love
or
that.
taking a break. And so I think for each person, that's not going to work for everyone. That's just what worked for me after I looked at the research and saw how it was breaking down. But I think we have to look at our time. We have to look at what we do with the dead space, because in our dead space of our days, that can really determine our emotions too. We can open our phones and see something on the news and go, oh my goodness, that affects the rest of the things that we do. Instead of taking that dead space to fill in, I shouldn't call it dead space, that optimal, that opportunity space is
I love that.
the place where we can shift and find that. So number one is time. And I didn't mean to take so long here, but I want to say one other thing on social media. I think that we also have to honor that one of the things that we asked in the study is we asked people if we feel like social media intentionally wants them to feel negative. And it was surprising how many people felt like social media intended to help people feel negative. Whether it does or doesn't is an entirely separate story.
Yeah.
But that caused me to look at the feed a little bit differently. And I'm noticing some changes on Facebook, on Instagram, even on LinkedIn about what's being served up to me. And so I made some decisions about being a lot more intentional about my algorithm and choosing to say, not interested in this, not interested in this, show me more of this. And I took 10 minutes on each platform and just adjusted what I could see. Show me more things from friends. Went to a few people that I really care about, commented on a bunch of their things. And so I think that we need to be more intentional about social media and less reactive, so that the time that we do spend, whatever it is that you decide is the right for you, is actually serving the purpose that you want it to serve.
Okay, I know we were going to be done with social media, but I want to say something about that.
Please.
I sat next to someone as we were waiting for a conference to start, good friend of mine, and we were doing the scroll, this thing, and she glanced over at my phone and she said, "You have a lot of good things come up on your feed." And I said, "Yeah, I do." And I said, she said, I don't get those things. How do I get those things?" And I said, "Well, let's take a look at your feed. Let's start going like this." And she was a little vulnerable, but because she felt safe with me, she did. And so she starts doing this. And the next thing, stuff that's coming up are women in bathing suits, women dancing, women looking provocative. I mean, it was nuts. And she said, "How do I get rid of that?" And I said, "Well, I'm not a social media expert, but I can tell you that the algorithm even reads our eyes and knows how long we spend on any photo. So the more you look at that, so if stuff like that comes up that I don't want to see, then I move off of that immediately and go to my story, or maybe I'll go to Facebook. And it's smart. It learns, when I show Mary these things, she goes away. And it was about 6 months later, she reached out to me and she said, "My feed has completely changed because I don't give it value, those things that I don't want to see." And I said, "It's pretty simple, just like that." And my social media doesn't necessarily drain me. It would if I was on there for, 2 or 3 hours, but because it's sending me people, just like you said, Michelle, that you love. Like, I love to see Tiffany's stuff come up.
Yep.
You know, I love to read. I'm a blank, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I've started following you, and now that I've liked so many of your stuff, so much of your stuff, you're going to start coming into my feed, and I'm going to love. So find those people that you want to emulate, those people that are sending you good vibes, and stop looking at the stuff where you feel less than. It is so easy to feel less than on social media.
Yep.
All right. So let's talk about this concept of this happiness report, and that you saw happiness as one of the biggest keys to unlock wellness, complete wellness. I think back, Michelle, when I was speaking a lot more to corporate.
Mm-hmm.
I speak now more to women's groups and motivational, inspirational, but I spoke to corporate. And if you talked about love, they were gone. That was it. They just turned off. Okay, she's over there in Nunu Nanaland. I want to talk about this. You could not use that word. Now, I'm hoping now that that's used. You can use that word. But love and business did not live together.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that? And is it shifting? It's certainly shifting in my world, because I'm drawing what? I'm drawing in people that want to talk about fear versus love, as opposed to being productive and less productive.
Yeah.
What are you experiencing?
I am noticing that I still feel like there are corporate places where I receive a list of words I can't say.
Oh,
Anything from, including like expletives or mentions of deity that they feel like might be divisive. But then I do get sometimes feeling words that people are like, please don't talk about X, Y, or Z because it makes our business uncomfortable. I haven't received that in the last 3 or 4 years. I feel like people are a
okay.
lot more open to conversation, and but I also feel like we live in a very divisive environment. And one of the things that I have found is that while I feel like if I have to stay so middle of the road and I can't take a side on either side, I don't feel like I do anyone a service by not touching on things that are important. That said, I do feel like I have been intentional to figure out how to say, I'm talking about happiness. I'm talking about soft skills. I'm talking about things that many organizations don't feel like are an important priority in their company, because they do want the productivity. They do want the hard skills on product training. And so sometimes it's a hard sell. But at the end of the day, now especially with the research and some of the case studies that we have with organizations, they're starting to see that. And so they're a lot more open to using words like love, as long as I'm not talking about romantic love and trying to be a matchmaker. They're more open
Right,
to those
right.
emotional conversations because we have the research to back it up. And I'm not saying you always have to have research to back up the things that you're passionate about, but I'm using it as an example how I feel like a lot more organizations are coming around. A lot more organizations are understanding the importance of emotional intelligence, and that if you truly want an organization and a team and an employee base that is passionate and engaged, then they are going to be emotional, and they want to talk about
Yeah.
all of the things that matter to them, from love to happiness to anger to everything in between, and to recognize that if we can give space to all of the emotions, then it makes it so much easier for people to regulate and navigate back to the emotions that are positive for any organization.
I can remember back even when I was still working, uh, and I was CEO for a long time, 35 years, and that I found that research came out probably maybe in the last 10 years that I was working, that what increased or what was the greatest motivator for employees. And everyone at that time would have thought, well, we pay them more.
Money. Yeah.
It was money. But the research showed, and you know this, that it was being appreciated, having work satisfaction, having a safe environment, things that had nothing to do with money.
Yep.
And that had to be the opening door to, well, so if it's not money, what what is the workplace like? And that's the space that you're working in now. So how have you found, or what would be the biggest aha that came about from your happiness research study?
There are two things that pop up in my head that I would like to share. 87% of working Americans, so 87% of the respondents that we researched, said that they want to be happier than they currently are. And that number is staggering to me in terms of even the people who are happy, even the ones who are at the highest levels of happiness, they want to be happier. So whether you have no happiness or whether you have lots of happiness, everyone wants to be even happier. And I think if organizations knew and understood that they could make some different decisions. Like we can certainly make different decisions as individuals, but I also feel like organizations can do that. But the other thing that was fascinating and obviously is at the core of all of my research is that 90% of working Americans said that if they were happier, they would be more productive, better team players, better able to handle conflicts at the office, they'd be better leaders, and that they would be better able to handle conflict when it happened at the office. 90% acknowledged that if they were happier, their work life would be better. And so, but the interesting thing is that they don't know how to be happier. I mean, they'll say things like going for a walk or taking time off or listening to music. But when we asked questions like, how do you get happier? What do you do? Lots of I don't knows, lots of I don't know. And so it's interesting that we have people that know that they want to be happier and they're not entirely sure how to get there. And it's just because like we talked about at the very beginning, I don't feel like these are conversations. We're not taking classes on emotional wellness. It's not required at colleges and universities. It's not something that we teach in high schools where they probably need it the most. And so we rely on our social and familial circles to teach emotional wellness. But now we're looking at generations being taught negative behavior or that it's okay to be grumpy and sad all the time. And so we're getting generations and generations of people who, because of the way that they were raised, may or may not feel like they can change their emotions or that this is just how life is. And that's what I'm on a mission to do, is help people understand their own emotional wellness and be able to see how it affects so many parts of their lives and how easy it is to find happiness every single day, despite the challenges that we're facing.
Well, I'm a boomer. I grew up in the 50s. Most of us believe that happiness is possible, and most of us believe that it's going to be better tomorrow. When I hear from people that say, am I going to be worse off than my parents' generation? Absolutely. I'm like, really? I never one time thought that. My parents told me enough times, that I live in the best generation and that things are going to be so much better. And they knew that my life was going to be better. I think my kids, who are mainly millennials, I have one in the next generation, I don't even know what that's called, but that believe that they would at least be the same. And that they would live as nice of a life as I have lived. But the ones that are after that, those are the ones that don't know how to leave the house. Because they know that out there is not as good as what is in this generation.
Yeah.
So if employers, and even as families and neighbors, we know this statistic, then it begs the question, how? And I'm turning to you. That's a question to you, just so you know.
I think this is the question, right? And this is the challenge. And I think about this on 3 levels. Okay. For me, my number 1 level is myself. If you can't own your own emotional wellness first and recognize that this is an internal job. No one else can do this for you. You have to decide. And one of the things that we're studying and noting is that it actually is so much easier to shift your emotions than you think. Like, you can say, I am sad, frustrated, heartbroken, and say, I really want to feel peace, even if it's not going like 10 times better. What can you do to feel a little bit more peaceful? If we can each take on that personal responsibility, that is our number one. Individuals understanding, what can I do? And that's my big thing. What can you do? There are lots of things you can't change. There are lots of circumstances in your life that you can't change. But what can you do? Can you have a podcast that you love to go to? Can you have a playlist of songs that you love? Are there things that you can do and work into your day that you can schedule and plan so that you can look forward to them? There's so many ways that you can increase your own personal happiness, and that is the first thing. The second is our close connections and relationships. So, like, I think about my kids. I think about my husband. I think about my neighbors and my close group of friends. It's like, what can I do to influence them? I'm not responsible for their happiness, but we have so much more power than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah,
But if we were to look around
totally.
and just take an interest in someone, we could increase their happiness. So if you're emotionally well, then it gives you the ability to reach out to someone and help them. And you don't have to be emotionally perfect. That's the thing that I think people need to understand is you don't have to be emotionally perfect to be able to be happy and to help other people, because nobody is perfect. And there are parts of my life that are great and parts of my life that are tricky, but that doesn't mean there aren't ways I can contribute. And so as long as we acknowledge that, we can help each other a little bit more. And then the third area is, if we go one step further out, all of us have another circle of influence, whether that's a work relationship, whether that's where it plays we're helping and serve in a community. Maybe it is some other way, whether we're coaching a T-ball team, but that third rung that's out there. I think that if we could all acknowledge that we have, responsibility is the wrong word, because that's what everyone wants to say. We're responsible, but we're not. We're not responsible for anyone else's happiness. But what we do have is an opportunity to influence others for good. And we do have an opportunity to give someone a way to say, oh my goodness, I know that she's got these challenges happening in her life. How is she staying happy? If she can do it, I can do it. And that kind of ripple effect is actually very influential in the circles that we have. So start with yourself, work on you, but really know that if it's something that you don't understand, read books. One of the things that people said in the study is that they want to read more books and listen to more podcasts about happiness and resilience. And so find podcasts, find books that you enjoy reading, and get that emotional level for yourself, and then talk about it with your friends and close family, and then look at that third rung where you can influence, but really start with you.
I love that. What's better than starting with you? And I love the part about you don't have to be perfect, because if that were the case, if I had the perfect emotional IQ, EQ, I would never be doing this podcast. I would never have written my book. I wouldn't speak to anyone. I wouldn't attend retreats. I would just sit home in a hole, and I would hide my light. And I think that is, we all can give something. We all have this spark inside of us that is ready to shine. And if I could ask one thing for the world, if we could just throw off that blanket of being less than, that's it. You know that, Michelle. That's really all we have to do. We just have to stop feeling less than you name it. I mean, whether it's the people on social media, or whether it's your mother or your sister or your friend or your people at work or your spouse, or, the person that's on TV. I don't care who it is, less than. And the other thing that I see with these kind of New Year's resolutions and and I'm thinking about that now, this time of the year, that people believe that for example, if I start this at point A, whatever the goal is, and then when I get to point B and I've accomplished this, then I can love me. Then I will be better than. Then I can be happy. Then I will be well. But the worth of that person is no different here than it is here. And maybe we will feel a sense of accomplishment, and we've built resilience and all sorts of great qualities. But our worth, our value, who we are inside has not shifted one iota. You know, Michelle, our time is up, but you and I could talk like forever.
We really could. I love it.
All right. Promise me you'll come back.
Yeah, so let's do it.
All right. We'll do that again. We'll come back. And another thing I've been starting to implement, and I haven't done one yet, but I have intention this year to do many more group podcasts with people. And so I might choose 3 or 4 people that have like mindsets, and then maybe throw in one that doesn't.
I love it.
I really stir it up, you know what I mean?
Sure.
But I would love to have you come to one of those group ones. That could be really fun. Maybe something with Tiffany and people from that whole ring.
Yes.
That could be fun. Michelle, thank you so much for being with us today. And you have accomplished the purpose of this podcast, which is to help all of us craft a more meaningful life, a life that we want to live, a life that we want to be in. So thank you for being here. Namaste.
Crafting a meaningful life.